Okay,
Yeah,
so let me start asking some questions. And so today we'll be talking about education. We'll be talking about learning the languages, learning especially English language. And today I just ask you, Miss Jane, to introduce yourself and to how you would like the listeners to how would you like to present yourself to the listeners? As I will just let you do this yourself, and then I'll just go right into the questions.
okay. My name is Jane Medina. I'm an American teacher. I studied in America, have a master's in teaching as well as national board certification from the States. But I've been teaching now internationally in the IB for 10 or 12 years. This is, I guess, my third international school teaching here in Georgia. And yeah, and I love the IB. I came to abroad in order to teach the IB because I like it much better than the American curriculum, the AP, which is much more common in America. So that's about it.
Okay, so first, so you're a teacher of English as language and literature. So if we ask you about your teaching method, how would you yourself describe it, and how do you think it might differ from the teaching methods of other teachers?
Yeah, yeah. Well, America is, I think, quite a bit more progressive in its teaching methods than in this part of the world. In America, we are much more student centered. And it's been a real struggle for me to come and work in a sort of an authoritarian top-down structure, which is what we have here. Where I come from, what the students want and need, the student really comes first. And I often go to the students for their opinions and their find out what their needs are and what their strengths are and what their interests are, etc., and shape the curriculum around them. Also, I like the students to be the ones doing most of the work in class because whoever does the work gets the learning. And so that's a very different way of teaching than traditionally where people stand up there and talk for, hours on end. But from my own experience and my own reading and knowledge, I've been teaching now for, I don't know, 25 years or so. I've learned that, kids don't learn by listening, they learn by doing. And so my philosophy is to let the kids do as much as possible. The other important thing is kids need to think, right? And so everything I do has a reason, and it's designed to make kids think, to analyze, to look beneath the surface, to figure things out for themselves, and to come up with their own opinions about how texts are structured and meanings of texts and that sort of thing, rather than pretending to know it all and telling kids what to think, or, my own perceptions and my own, opinions, which I think is relatively useless for kids. So that's one way. The main thing is having the students be active learners. And another big difference is I like students to have choices. I like them to be able to shape their own education. I'm not somebody who tries to force people to do things that they don't want to do. And I always try to get kids' feedback before I as I prepare a program, it's always interactive, it's always collaborative with the students, as opposed to something I have designed or I have in mind that I want to impart to students. So that's another big difference. There's a bunch more, but those are two main differences, I think. In America, I think it's more common to have the type of teaching I do. It's not super common, but it's a little bit more common than it is in this part of the world, where it's more a little bit old-fashioned and more lecture-oriented. Although I have to say, as you guys head off to university, you're liable to go backwards and get more of this lecture-type teaching. And the reason for that is because it's efficient. Like when I don't know about the universities you go to, but the big American universities, the first couple of years, you go into big lecture halls with 500 other students, and a lecturer stands up there and talks for an hour. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 3 times a week, and then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you're with some grad student in smaller groups to ask questions and this and that. But that's, for efficiency, but it's not very effective. And nowadays, the universities, especially the small liberal arts colleges, are much more progressive and do more seminars and do smaller classes and do more project-based learning, and much more interactive than the big universities or the more traditional styles. Yeah.
Okay, that's actually very, very interesting. And to continue on about the topic of more independent learning. So as an IB DP teacher, you get a certain freedom of choosing which books to study, right? In the language course.
Yeah, normally, yes. It depends a little bit on the school, I think. But since I've been teaching it, yes, I've had full opportunity to choose the books. But one thing that happened, which was kind of funny this year, and I don't know that I told you guys this, but Handmaid's Tale, I ordered a bunch of those for, both Reza and my classes, and both for this year's group, you guys, and the DP ones, right? So I ordered like 45 copies, and I never got a single one because the director of the school didn't like the book. Yeah. So she just didn't order it. She just wouldn't buy it. However, I have to say that I went to Miss Nonica, and she went to bat for me, and I got the books. So I was able to teach that book again this year because it's such a, it's just so perfect for right now, with Trump and all his, shenanigans. It's and with the religious extremism, both Muslim and Christian, and and Hindu for that matter, and with all the women's rights stuff going on, and the backlash against abortion, and etc. It's just really perfect for now. Plus, it's so well written. So anyway, yeah. So I get to choose, and the way I choose is I choose things I like. You saw me struggle with books that I didn't know or like. And that was a real struggle for me. I mean, I just can't get excited about existentialism or or war, anti-war. I mean, that just so I it's hard, and so interestingly, the school tried to get Reza and I to teach the same thing, right? And but this new course in particular, it takes a huge amount of work to build this new course, because it's not only 6 novels or 6 literary works, but it's also 6 non-literary bodies of work that you have to pull together, and then they have to do an individual oral pulling parts of these pieces together. Anyway, so it took me months to build my new course, and Reza took him like months to build his, and then they said, well, we really would like you two to be doing the same thing. And again, I said, no, sorry, that does not work, I mean, the important thing for me, and it's always been that way in my career, is I'm teaching something I'm passionate about or something I'm really interested in. Otherwise, it would be like some of the other classes you might have had sometime in your life, where if the teacher isn't really very excited about what they're teaching, it certainly rubs off on the kids. Hasn't that been your experience? I'm sure you've had some.
For sure, yes.
Yeah, where you're just going through the motions, So anyway, so I and the other thing I try to do too is I try to make it relevant to my students. That's what I mean with Handmaid's Tale. I don't want to teach some dry old thing like Pride and Prejudice or whatever. I mean, that's a good book, but I don't want to teach some old dead books that don't have any relevance to kids' lives today, and that have, archaic language or themes that don't resonate, etc. So always with my teaching, I try to make sure that it's relevant and interesting to the kids. And then that's also why I'm not real heavy handed because I don't make kids do things they don't want to do. But on the other hand, I try to make it as interesting and as pleasurable as possible so that they want to do it, so that they like the book, so that they enjoy reading, so that they want to come to class and not have it be huge drudgery. If I felt like it was huge drudgery, I wouldn't be able to do it, teach. I would have to, because I was a student for so long myself, and I see the world as a student, as a kid, and so that shapes how I teach, I think. Yeah, I put myself in your shoes, in other words. It's just like what I told you about the DP exams being canceled,
Yeah.
It's like, we had this huge load on our backs, it's like being loaded down with a ton of bricks. And for me not to tell you right away that you could throw those bricks off your back, to me was unconscionable, I mean, why would I wait? But I did get in trouble for that, but I am not sorry because
We really do appreciate that.
yeah, well, but I just don't understand why people would. But again, it's the difference between the democratic sort of student-centered approach I have versus this top-down controlling of information and controlling of kids' behavior that is more traditional for this part of the world. Don't you think? Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And since you get to choose which, well, to some extent, which books to study if the school doesn't interfere with that choice, do you feel like you might be also influencing the personal preferences of your students with those books? And how, if you feel like you do, what do you think about it? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Or
Well, it's definitely political. There's no question about that my choices have political ramifications for students. I had he was Korean, I think, Jaewon. I had a kid in my last school who gave me a hard time because everything was feminist. All my book choices were feminist. Is this feminist? Are you showing a certain bias here? And I said, yeah, but the bias has been in the other direction for so long. It's about time we turn the tables. Look at the quote unquote the canon. It's all white male authors for 200, 300 years or more, all the way back to the Greeks, I suppose. So yeah, it's time we turn the tables a little bit. But yeah, I think it definitely does influence kids. And there's, but the thing is, if I think it's okay because mostly it's around issues, that you can have your own opinions about. I had a colleague once who was a Christian fundamentalist, right? And who was actually proselytizing to, trying to convert his students to his way of thinking. And that isn't what as you know, that isn't what I would do at all. To try to convince kids to follow my way of thinking. That's exactly what I'm against, So in choosing the books that I choose, it presents lots of controversial and complex issues, but I don't take a stand on those things. Rather, I let the kids grapple with those ideas and be exposed to seeing things from a whole different point of view. You didn't read The Bluest, which is a book I had my kids read this year, but it was written from the perspective of a young Black girl in the would have been post-Depression America, but what her life was, so it's really, and she was abused by her father, and but from a very poor Black point of view, and that just really opens up your world once you can see from different perspectives. And I like literature from different areas and from different ethnicities and from different perspectives, because I think that really helps you become a much more open-minded and well-rounded thinker, rather than just my point of view or white male authors. You know what I mean? I just think it's really important to broaden one's experience, through reading, which is, that's what's so cool about reading, is that you get into something like Margaret Atwood, you get in her head, and God, what an experience to be able to see the world through her eyes, and all these other, and when I read, I'm always just astounded by these people's brilliance and their creativity and their ability to create these worlds that, you know, some ordinary schmo like me could never come up with, you know? So anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, so I also wanted to ask, as so you have a degree in teaching, and how and here, for example, in our school, we had other teachers like Mr. Reza, for example, had a degree not in teaching but in literature, like
Mhm,
solely in literature. So how do
mhm.
you think your uh, way of teaching would be different from those teachers who have
Yeah.
degrees in, yeah,
Ah,
in literature?
excellent question, actually. Where I come from in the States, I worked in a top school district on this small island where I come from, and it was the best school district in the state. And I worked for my first 10 years or so in middle school, but I wanted to work in the high school, right? Well, the high school admin wouldn't take any of us middle school teachers. Instead, they would hire Harvard graduates, you know, that had masters. I was teaching humanities at the time, that had master's degrees in history. Well, those were, as you can imagine, were just the classic stand up and lecture for 90 minutes type, you know? And they were terrible teachers. And they were always male, of course, you know, and we women who wanted to come up from the middle school. And in order, you know, in America, I taught middle school. So I'd have 5 classes of 30 seventh graders a day. Yeah. Can you imagine? 150 kids a day. And you have them 30 at a time. And these are rascals, you know, they're 7th, 12-year-olds, right? So you have to really know what you're doing in order to teach in America. You've got to be interesting enough to, you can't get by with standing in front of a bunch of 12-year-olds for 90 minutes and talking. You know what I mean? You would never survive. So if you teach middle school, you develop really good teaching skills. But they didn't care about that at the high school. They wanted these hotty-toddy, you know, males with highfalutin degrees to give them prestige, you know? And of course, the guys, they would never last, right? So the same thing happens, I think, if you're talking about degrees. Um, my degree is actually, my undergrad degree is actually in anthropology. Like I said, I'm very interested in people and culture, and my master's is in teaching. And so I am certified in English and in language arts and in history and in social studies and in anthropology and maybe a few more. So I have all those certifications, but no, my degree is not in English. And I think I think a master's in English would be really, or a doctorate like Reza has, would be really handy in some ways. But I don't think by itself it's enough, you know,
Mhm.
because the teaching part is so fundamental to being a good teacher, you know, learning how to present that material rather than just standing up there and talking, which, like I said, I think, you know, is interesting for 15 minutes or so, but I don't know how much kids actually get out of that sort of teaching style. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think with experience, even if you don't have formal training, you can learn that skill, you know. And if you're sensitive to your students and attentive to their needs, then you figure all that out. You know, you don't really have to be taught that, how to be a good teacher. So I think it's a big advantage to have a master's or a PhD in English. You know, I feel teaching at your level with kids like you, thank you very much. I feel it, you know, a little less than, you know, than uh, fully qualified, you know, to teach kids at your level, you know. And so, but it's also part of it's kind of an age thing, you know, as I'm getting to about the time, you know, where it's time to move on and do something else, you know. Because I think, you know, what I'm learning here is that, you know, you don't you know, you aren't as sharp at 60 as you are at, you know, 30. And, you know, you have a lot more wisdom, perhaps, you know, a lot more experience. And, you know, there are certain advantages, but, you know, it's like my memory is my short-term memory isn't that great. So that's a big handicap as well. And so, teaching is really a tough job. It takes everything you've got, and that's what I've loved about it all these years. But at some point, it's time, might be time to do something else. If I was 40 again, yeah, I would do more. I would do maybe a master's in English at this point, because I didn't really start out as an English teacher. I'm humanities. And I only started teaching English at a high level, at high school level, with my last job in Indonesia, where they hired me to teach DP. But, I'd never taught high school English. I'd only taught 7th grade English and humanities. So, but on the other hand, as you know, I'm a huge reader and have read, thousands and thousands and thousands of books. So, but the problem is they go in one ear and out the other, and I don't always remember all the details, because I read too much. So anyway. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Thank you. It's a great response, I think, and to continue talking about language and literature. And so you, as far as we know right now, you've had experience from of teaching to various age groups of students. I mean, quite a variety. From middle school. Yeah. Up to 12th grade. And so what do you think, looking at all these age groups, what do you think the role of language is in each and every one of them, of learning it and of using it? And how is it different from a role of language in the life of an adult, for example?
Mm-hmm. Well, interestingly, it's a bit different in America versus internationally. Because of course it's a native language in America, but internationally, of course, all of your studies in the West are dependent on your facility with language. That's why with my younger kids, the MYP 4s and 5s, reading is a huge part of what I do with them, because if you can't read in English, if you don't understand the language, you're really at a huge disadvantage as you move on into the upper grades. So a facility with, oh God, in my last school, I would get kids in at 9th grade, at 10th grade with almost no English in my English language and literature classes. And of course, that's just really difficult. But I don't like, the way I was taught English was whole language, which means you're just using it, right? It's not memorized, it's not diagramming sentences, it's not learning all the formal words for, gerunds and, participles, it's not all that, what is the word, all that grammar lingo that kids have to learn when they take a foreign language. So I've never taught that way either. And so the way I teach language is really whole language, which means lots and lots of reading and writing and talking, and not a lot of memorization of vocabulary words, not a lot of diagramming of sentences, but rather just immersion in how the language is used. Actually, right now, which is kind of interesting, I'm learning Spanish on my own, because I'm going to be moving to Costa Rica. And so I have this, I don't know, you guys probably know this app, this Duolingo app. Yeah. And what's interesting is they do the same thing. I mean, it is whole language. And this app is made with the latest technology and the, all the language, everything they know about, and feedback about how language is best learned. And it's whole language too. And it's like, and it kind of drives me nuts sometimes, because I want a book where it says, how is this verb used in 3 different ways and why, but instead it's just repetition until you internalize what it is, how that word is supposed to be used. And I'm discovering that it, that it actually works, And so, anyway, so that's both in America and here, that was more my philosophy with language is doing it in an immersion sort of way, rather than doing it in a contrived academic grammar-based memorization of vocabulary type way, just because that's just so freaking boring, you know. It's much more interesting to grapple with the English, you know, and to write stories, and you know, and so what I do is then I fix the kids' English, you know, and that's why I always have kids write drafts so that I can fix it, and then when they see that it's wrong, and then that's how they learn it best, I think. So does that answer your question more or less?
For sure, for sure. I mean, it's a great answer, and since we started talking about working with kids whose first language was not English and who had to learn it in school, so that must feel, I don't know, does it feel like a big responsibility to be this like influence on the kids who are probably getting their knowledge of English first from you? So how does that feel?
Well, you know, I don't know whether it's as much from me as from their peers and from, again, their immersion in a whole English speaking school, you know. Um, I feel, you know, it's tough when you have a class of 20 and you have people that are fluent and native speakers, and then you also have kids that have very little knowledge and understanding of English. I mean, that again, that puts a teacher in kind of a bad position because they can't meet the needs of both students very easily. But again, that ties into your very first question, which is how do I teach? And so, you know, I wouldn't stand up. If I was standing up there and talking and explaining and on, that poor kid wouldn't get a thing, right? It'd be a total waste of time. But since I don't teach like that, I can still meet the kid at his own level. So in other words, he would be writing his written task. He'd write a paragraph, and somebody else would write a 50-page short story. You know what I mean? And so either one would be fine, and I would give them feedback and help them improve and just move forward, and have individual writing conferences, have them self-select their reading books, you know, all of those strategies, having them work together in pairs, do presentations in groups, you know, support from their you know, their peers, et cetera, et cetera. So again, if you're a good teacher, you have all these strategies that can help sort of bridge that gap between those kids that are really strong and the ones that struggle. Yeah. Now, where it gets tough is in just like our course that you just had, you know, that DP course where the exams are exactly the same for everybody. You know, so you got poor old Sergo on one hand, you know, and you got Dasha on the other, you know, and you know, you both have to take the same exam, right? So it's not the greatest scenario, because I have to, you know, I have to prepare you both for the same exam using the same criteria, you know? And so the problem with the DP, the NYP is much better. It has much more flexibility. But the problem with the DP is part of what it does, it's a sorting mechanism, as you know, which means they're trying to separate the sheep from the goats, you know, or the ducks from the geese or whatever. And they want the kids that are most proficient at those academic skills, and they want to give them the best positions in the universities. So that's a big part of why the DP is the way it is. It levels the, you know, the assessment field. Everyone has to take the same assessment so that they can see who is most proficient, right? But that's not good for kids, you know, that's not good for kids. It'd be much better for me as a teacher if I could give you one set of curricula and one set of assignments and do something else with Sergo, you know what I mean? And that would be much better for him. And, you know, and for Kieran, his stuff would have to all be oral, you know, because Kieran loves to talk, you know, and he's good and he's articulate and he's smart. So if all of his exams were oral, and his assignments, he would do just fine. But anyway, you know, what's nice is to be able to shape that sort of thing to the student, as opposed to doing it the other way and having the student have to conform to this really highly academic sort of paradigm, which is what the DP is. But we have to remember what the purpose of it is, and that is the purpose. It's really not so much for education as it is for sorting kids into the next step of their careers, you know, of their career possibilities. So anyhow.
Yeah, thank you. I think this right here is a really nice transition to what Yeva prepared to ask. This is exactly, I think, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, but correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's a really nice transition to your topic here.
Yes, for
Okay.
sure. So, yeah, even though it is a very nice transition, I still want to talk a little bit on a different side. So I want to start a little bit with the teaching method. I want to talk a little bit more about your teaching method. And first of all, I want to know how rewarding is the teaching process for you, and why did you stick with this for so long?
That's actually a great question. I never even started teaching till I was, almost 40, right? It's the last thing I ever thought I would do, because in my generation, women were able to break out of those traditional jobs of teaching and nursing, right? And I could do anything I wanted, right? So why on earth would I want to be a teacher? But I spent 20 years doing all sorts of different things. I did soils engineering, and I was a chef in a restaurant, and I worked for a administrative assistant, and I did all sorts of different things. And I never really found I worked as in a law firm. I never really found my bliss, as it were. I never found anything I was all that excited about. But then, and I had the same problem in university, which is why I ended up in anthropology, because I was always very interested in cultures. But there aren't all that many jobs in anthropology, of course. But anyway, so I got married. I married a lawyer, and we lived on this island, and I wanted to have kids. But my husband was a lawyer. He would commute into the city on the ferry boat every day, and even a part-time job becomes full-time. So he was basically unavailable. So I wanted to be able to raise my own kids if I was going to have my kids. So I knew I had to work on this island, and I knew I didn't have the personality to be a barista or a teacher's assistant or something like that. So I thought, well, heck, my kids are little. Maybe I'll just get a teaching degree just for something to do until they're old enough where I can go back to work, right? So I went into, and as to get a teaching degree, you actually have to go into the schools and do, observations, and you have to do, student teaching and what have you. So anyway, so I went into this school, this middle school, to do my observation. It was like, whoa! It was in the early days of computers, and the kids were doing History Day, and they were making videos on this huge computer that took up like part of a room, And there was this just really wonderful woman who was the teacher, and this was a high-end school, right? It was probably the best school in the state, and very well resourced. So, and the people and the teachers, I just loved the people. I hated those backstabbing business people I had, worked with. But these people were all warm and friendly and generous and kind, and they loved kids. And the things that they were doing were so exciting and so much fun. It was like, yes, I finally found my home. This is it for me. And so yeah, and I got a job as soon as I finished school at that same school, and right on the island, and I just loved it. It was just because, as I mentioned earlier, it takes every bit of everything you've got to be a good teacher, especially in America. It takes all your intellect, it takes all your self-control, it takes all your energy, it takes all of your efficiency, ability to be efficient, and etc. I mean, it's just really a demanding job. And so that was really well suited for me, because I hate being bored, and I can't stand being bored, and I can't stand wasting time. And so, I had kind of a high-toned personality. And so for me, it was really the perfect job. And so, what was your question? Am I answering your question, or did I get off track here?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I asked you about the rewarding part of the process, and I think you're answering it pretty well.
Yeah. So anyway, and the thing is, I've never stopped learning, and the other thing I love about it is that I learn from the kids, from the students. And, I told my kids the other day, how I was stuck on a meeting, we had to learn how to do tests have our students take tests using, online technology, right? So we had this 90-minute Zoom conference the librarian teaching us how to use this. And I said, yeah, you kids taught me such a great trick. I just turned off my camera, turned down the volume, and got out my book, and it was great. Because that's sometimes what my students do for my little Zoom classes. But anyway, I'm always learning so many things from my kids, and that's why teaching has been such a wonderful career for me, because it's never boring. It's never boring. It's always challenging, and I'm always learning. And I, and of course, as you know, I'm sure I love the kids. I like to work with the kids. And this Zoom scenario has been a little hard, I have to say, this online teaching, because it takes out all the, the human component, the inner relationships, and that's a little bit tough with both staff and students. So, it really takes a big chunk out of the out of the whole, of a really important chunk. So, but anyway, luckily it won't go on forever. We'll be finishing with this soon. Yeah.
Definitely, yes. And also coming back to the topic that you started to discuss with Dasha, as we all know, IB is not flawless. And as you had this teaching experience back in America, and you have a very good experience teaching internationally, I want to ask, first of all, what do you think this international environment, I want to ask if what positive and what negative sides do you see in this international environment for the students, and how does it contribute or to their development, or on the other hand, how it stops them from developing certain skills?
So, I think
yeah.
it's the former. It's definitely the former, and I'm sure you guys could speak to that better than I could. But I think the international environment, and that's part of why I live overseas, it's so much richer. It's just so wonderful to be working with people from various cultures and with different perspectives. And I think that just really enriches the learning environment, because you don't see things the same way. And, like I've learned a lot being in this school, frankly. I knew I was taking a risk coming here, because this isn't this isn't what we would say. I guess there are tiers in the international school, and there are first tier, second tier, third tier. Anyway, there's whole groups of schools that are in the top tier schools, which is what I worked in before. And this one I knew wasn't. So I knew it was going to be different. But I wanted to sort of experience that. And but it has been so interesting for me because it is so different working in, like I said before, in an authoritarian structure, which is much more common here in, the former Soviet republics, because it was, it's top down, it's authoritarian, it's not democratic like it is in the West. And so, that's been a real challenge for me, having, just that thing I got into with Nanika about telling you guys is just one example, but to have things imposed from above and being told what to do and not to have any say in how things are done is just really hard. And not to let the kids have any say or let the kids have any freedoms. I was just really appalled when I started, and we were told we could have I was an advisor, and I was told we could have a party, right? Christmas party. So we got the party all arranged, and it was, I just assumed it was on the last day of the advisory period. And so we had it all arranged, and bringing food in and drinks and, this and that. And it was going to be fun. We had music, and, everything was all organized. And then we found out they weren't allowed to eat in the classroom, And, and not only that, nobody had told me that it wasn't supposed to be on that Friday. It was supposed to be on like the last day of school, but nobody had even told me that, right? So we had it all set, and, Tamuna came in and about had a heart attack because she saw these open pop bottles. So she went and ran Nanika, and then Nanika came, and everything was all in, total uproar, and, stuff like that. you know? I mean, it's like, and so our whole party just went right down the tubes, you know? And, you know, various other things kids have tried to do, but without, you know, I mean, it's just really, it's really strange working in and if I weren't the age I am, you know, with the more easygoing, flexible, tolerant sort of personality that I've developed after all these years, I would never have been able to survive here, you know, just because, you know, I'm just not used to that sort of thing. But what I have to remember is that, and that's what's so interesting, is that, you know, I have a huge respect for Marina. I mean, she built this school up from nothing, you know, and you know, it's a good school, and she knew nothing about how to run a school. And yet, look what she's done. And I have huge respect for Monica, who's, you know, is a teacher and you know, you know, and works harder than anybody to run that school. However, I have to just remember that these women are from a different context. You know, they have different ways of doing anything. I mean, I feel like a sweeper sometimes. You know, an untouchable, and I've never felt. You know, I feel like I'm treated like that sometimes. You know, just like, you know, they won't, you know, like they won't have any sort of friendship with me or relationship with me because I'm an employee, you know, and I have to do things, you know, and if they don't like what we do, then it's just, you know, we'll show you the door. I mean, that is just so different than what I'm used to, where I had a strong say, you know, any decision, teachers were always brought into all of those decisions, and the kids first and foremost. So it's been a real interesting position to be in. But what it does, getting to the original question, is, you know, if you didn't, it taught me a lot about this part of the world. And I read, there's a wonderful Belarusian author, Svetlana Alexievich.
Yeah.
I read all of her books, you know, and I've read, you know, 50 Russian Winters, and I've read, you know, Escape from, what was it called? I don't know, I can't remember, the one about the hijacking. I think it's Escape from the USSR. Anyway, so I've read all these books about this part of the world, which has really opened up my eyes to, you know, to the way people from this part of the world think. And in my experience with you guys and learning what you're, you know, like, especially somebody like Diane, who was often telling me what it was like for her in her school, you know, memorize, recite, you know, and what a challenge it was to learn how to do things in this new way, which required so much independent thought and critical analysis, you know, and how difficult that was for you guys. So, you know, it's you know, it's wonderful. And to learn, and oh God, and the Georgians, you know, I mean, what an interesting bunch they are. You know, I've never lived in a culture where they were so tight and so hard to access, you know, so closed, you know, to, I mean, very nice and lovely and friendly, but only to a point, you know. Like, I've never had any of them ever ask me to do anything, you know. Or to come over, or to see a movie, or, you know, anything like that. You know, it's very, or nobody's checking up on me through this this whole pandemic thing and breaking the wrist, you know. I mean, it's like, you know, that's what I mean. It's just a very strange experience living here. But it's very it very much opens up your experience, and you see the world in a new way. And I think that's the advantage of, one of the big advantage of being in an international situation like this. Plus, I think the IB is really good as far as programs are. It's better than anything in America. I think it's a lot better than the AP, which is just, you know, memorize and ram content. So I think the program is really good. And I think it's really good for kids to mix with kids from other parts of the world. It's enriching. I don't see any downsides at all, other than, like I've just been explained, other than it's not easy always, you know, for you or for me to be immersed in a whole alien sort of universe, which is sort of what it's like. But you guys will soon find out, particularly when you go to your new universities, and then you'll say, oh, now I know what Miss Jane was talking about. This is hard. about these Dutch people. They're a little bit inaccessible, you know. Or if you go to America, you'll have a very different experience yet. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Anything else? Mm.
So also as I want to talk a little bit more specifically about the DP program as it is only for 2 years. Do you actually see a progress in your students in terms of, I would say, their analytical skills, or do you
Yeah.
see the change
Yeah.
in the way they approach any kind of problems or any kind of
Oh,
assignment?
gosh, yeah. Oh, gosh, absolutely. Now, I would have done much better if I would have had, my DP2s for the first year, right? Yeah, that's where all the growth happens or should happen. My kids already, my DP1s have already done all their assessments. Yeah. They've done higher level essay, they've done individual oral, they've done paper 1, they've done paper 2. And I make them, and when they first started out, I mean, they were just abysmal, particularly in their writing, just abysmal. And it was like, I was horrified. But then I showed them how to do it, and lo and behold, they can do it. They just need to be shown how, right? And so now, I mean, they just wrote 2 paper 1s in the last couple of weeks. I haven't even done this. Well, I guess this is their third. After their first one, I guess it was the 4. They wrote 2 drafts, and then I made them rewrite them correctly. And so they've actually done 4 in the last couple of weeks. But yeah, the growth is just enormous. And they're, they don't know anything about those literary devices. They don't know how to write essays. They know nothing about thesis statements. They know nothing about supporting their statements with evidence, on and on and on. They just don't know, but they're sharp, you youngsters. You're nobody's fools. And so they just need to be shown a couple of times, and then lo and behold, the growth is enormous. What's wonderful about you guys, you scholarship kids, is that you're much more driven, much more willing to work. You're much more interested in improving. Those are the kids I love to teach, the kids that want to learn, and that's who I do best with. And that's who I'll put my energy into. If you don't want to learn, it's, I'll just kind of blow you off. I mean, I'll spend my time on the kids that want to learn. And, that's not the greatest way to be. I mean, I think some people that are really good at kind of whipping kids and threatening them and getting them in, I mean, I think that's probably good for kids, but that's just not my style. But I've always worked with strong students, and so it's wonderful to work with you guys and kids that meet me halfway, just make huge progress. And so I'm sure my DP1s will do well on their exams next year. And so just because they've been taught, and they're quite capable of learning, so it's wonderful. And the other thing that's fun is because they have nothing when they come in any of those skills, the growth is enormous. Now normally if I had them through 4 or 5, then you don't see, you see the incremental growth. You don't see this huge leap like you do with you guys coming in from outside. Yeah. So.
Yeah, great. Also, as you have mentioned that you are learning Spanish, which is really interesting, I wanted to know if you also see the difference in learning when you are a little bit older than it is in the usual expected years of learning a language. Do you see any kind of struggles or difference or anything?
That's another great question. So I lived in Indonesia last, right? And of course I went right to work, and I actually did it in Cambodia as well. I went right to work learning the language, and it wasn't long, maybe a year or so, where I could get by pretty well, because Indonesian's it's not like Georgian. It's a relatively easy language to learn. But there were the other ladies in this school that were like my age. They had lived in Indonesia for like 20 years, 25 years, and didn't speak the language, And I think, Of course, it's much harder for older people to learn, but they can certainly, it just takes longer, but they can absolutely learn. But it's just like what I was saying with you guys. It's important that they try. To me, it's disrespectful to, well, I don't know whether that's the right word. I don't know. It just seems like if you're going to live in someone else's country, you should at least make an attempt to communicate with the locals. And I actually tried Georgian too, but boy, since I knew I wasn't going to be there that long, I threw in the towel pretty early on that one. It was just too hard, you got this cost benefit thing, and the cost was just much greater than the perceived benefit. But since, what I'm planning is retiring in Costa Rica, which is why I'm madly working on my Spanish. And what my first thing that I will do is I will go to a language school for 6 months when I get there, and become, relatively fluent before I even settle in. Because, that's part of the fun of living in a different culture, is being able to, to communicate with the locals. And I wish I could here, but, it would be one thing if I was planning to stay, but, when you're only going to be in a place for a short time, and my work at schoolwork was, fairly demanding. So I just don't really have the mental fortitude to take on Georgian on top of, 2 different DP classes and, and everything else that I have to do. So, so I didn't, the only time I never realized, when I finally realized that I wasn't quite as sharp as I used to be, was when I actually taught DP economics in Cambodia. They needed someone to teach DP economics, and they only needed it for 1 year. And I thought, oh God, these Cambodian kids, I can keep up with these Cambodian kids, So I'm sure I could teach the first year, no problem. Well, and that's true. I can keep up with the Cambodian kids, but what I couldn't keep up with was a frickin' DP. You had so much to cover in such a small amount of time. And so it was like, all right, kids, we're moving to the next chapter. And they're like, we're not ready. And I know, tough, we have to move on anyway. That's why I never wanted to teach economics again. But what I would do is I'd read the chapter the night before, and I'd learn it, I'd get it all down and say, yeah, no problem. Then I'd go to teach it the next day, and it would have gone whoosh. So that was my first, it was like I'd never even read the chapter, And the same thing happened with those books. that's why I was struggling a little bit with those books, The Stranger, and, if they're not, I can read them, and I can read all the notes and this, and, the e-notes and this and that, and get it pretty, down great over the weekend. And then come Monday, it's like, so who is it? Who are those guys called again? Tralfa Morgans? What happens when you get older is you just don't, your short-term memory goes, and so you just can't keep, and recall, trying to pull things up, because your brain is so jam-packed full of stuff. It's sometimes hard to retrieve the word that you're looking for or whatever. But anyway, yeah. So I think people need to keep trying. They need to keep learning, and that's again a really important part of living internationally and doing new things, is that you don't get so rigid. You're much more willing to you have to be flexible, and you have to learn, try. You've got to, like me, trying to cook with all these ingredients that I don't know how to use. It's like, so I get out trying to read Georgian recipes and find out what blue fenugreek is. What does it taste like? Et cetera, et cetera. I made stuffed peppers the other day. God, just like they did at school, they were so good. Yeah. So anyway, I just think that's that gives richness to your life, and it's just very meaningful to, to just broaden your experience as much as possible. Yeah. Anyway, you're going to put your poor listeners to sleep if you keep me talking very much longer. This is more talk than I normally do in a week. Probably in 2 months with the quarantine.
No, it's great. And actually, I have my final question. So,
okay.
Yeah, it's going to be a long question because, I will start. A lot of people all over the world, they try to learn English, and they face so many challenges. First of all, because a lot of people think that their accents are not that good and they are ashamed and afraid to speak in front of people, and especially in front of native speakers. Other
Yeah.
people, they just get confused when it comes to all the different aspects of English. And in my final question, I want to ask you, as you are an American and a native speaker, so do you think people should be afraid of talking or of explaining themselves? And how do you feel when you see a person who is clearly not fluent in English? How do you feel about it?
Well, it's very funny because, someone like me who is highly educated, right, relatively intelligent, relatively articulate, when I lived in Indonesia and I speak sort of pidgin Indonesian, I'm talking like a toddler, and I feel like, and I feel like, oh God, here it is. I'm trying to come up with this sophisticated things to say, like I normally would, and I've got about 10 words to use, and I don't use them correctly, so I know I sound like a, incompetent dimwit, but that the answer to that question really has to do with a person's confidence. I remember when I went, I went to this study tour to China with a couple of people from the university. They picked 20 teachers from around the country to go on this whole trip to China for 3 weeks. This all expenses paid study tour of China. And I remember we were in somewhere, I don't know whether it was a Forbidden City or somewhere in China. And these academics I was with, who spoke, in theory, fluent Chinese, were asking these young men, had some question, and we're trying to ask these young men to find something out. And these young men just started laughing at this gal, at her Chinese, and she was horrified. I mean, she was so embarrassed and humiliated that these guys were laughing, at her because her Chinese, pronunciations were off. But, again, she wasn't a person, I think, that had a lot of experience outside America, so she wasn't really used to that. For me, of course, I'm sure people were laughing at me all the time, but I just laugh right along with them. I mean, it just wouldn't faze me to be laughed at because, and of course I would never laugh at anybody else, or make fun of anybody else because, and so when people, and they say to me all the time, all these taxi drivers I take all over town and the shops, restaurants, they always say, oh, sorry about my bad English, I say, what are you talking about? Your English is great. It's far better than my Georgian. You want to hear my Georgian? Knock von dies. I got 5 words. You know what I mean? So I always put myself in, I mean, I just, especially as an American, all of us Americans are pretty monolingual, right? And so, and most of the Europeans are multilingual. And so, I think that's a big problem for America. And a big disadvantage Americans have. And that's why I tell you guys you're so sexy from a college standpoint, because you do have skills, especially in America, that American students don't have. So anyway, I just, what's so amazing to me is, again, the drive. I've traveled all over the world, of course, and I remember these street kids in India, right? Who spoke, young men trying to make a buck. They could speak in, like 5 or 6 different languages that they had just picked up on the street on their own. Or what they would do, other kids I met would hang out in people's windows and watch their TVs. These are kids who don't even have TVs, so they would watch American movies or so by, peeking in people's windows. But they've picked up these languages completely on their own with no training. It's all a verbal. It's not, I'm sure they couldn't read or write it. But I think it's just so astounding that they understand that that's their ticket, that's their meal ticket, is to learn English or other languages, and then they do what they need to in order to learn it and get by. and I find that just amazing. And I've seen it all over the world. That the kids that have to survive on the streets have to pick up um, these languages, and like I said, sometimes multiple languages, 5 or 6, in order to do your sales pitch to various tourists that that come by. So, and I think what's really important about the language is it allows you to, like I said before, you can't really access the culture that well without the language. I mean, the two are intertwined, and it gives so much more richness if you if you can access the language. So I think it's wonderful that you all have worked hard, and and I'm sure your English improved a lot at New School, didn't it? Yeah.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, both writing and spoken. By the way, Eva, I keep forgetting to ask you how you liked the mock exam, the mock paper 1.
Oh, we actually wrote it many times.
Did you? Many times. It was the same one I had given you, but I didn't know Reza had given it to you.
Yes, we have done, and the criteria which I used to pick the text to analyze were the pair that I was least bored analyzing.
Oh my gosh, is that
And
right?
Yes, same, exactly the same.
So it's
Oh my
like
God.
I don't know more about bees than I know about robots, but we've done robots so much that at this
Oh,
point I'm just all for bees.
oh my gosh, isn't that funny? Yeah, see, I gave him, I mean, this is the part of the problem, like I said, A, is I gave all my stuff to Reza, last year. So, and then A, didn't have anything for myself, and B, that he used everything. But I didn't know, I thought I'd given it to you, and I didn't think you had ever even seen it there, Miss Dasha. And when I suggested it to Reza, he didn't let on that that you guys had seen it before. Oh, that's hilarious! How funny!
I just forgot about it.
Yeah. Well, the scaffolding isn't such a bad thing for most of you kids, anyhow. I mean, I never cared if you'd seen the exam before, because even if you'd seen it, doesn't mean you can write about it.
Yeah.
And aren't you glad? Wasn't it kind of nice not to have to write the exam papers? How did you guys feel about that?
That's great. I mean, without the teacher supervision, how are we supposed to prepare? How we're supposed to?
Yeah, I know. Exactly.
And I'm really glad that it all turned out that way. Under these circumstances, this is, I think, the only possible and the best option.
Exactly, I agree. You know what they're doing with the AP exams, right? I told you why I like the DP better. They're doing the AP exams electronically, but they're doing them at the same time for the whole world. So that means you poor kids would have to do it between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m.
Oh my God, this is inhumane.
I know. It's just crazy. I know, exactly. But that's what they're doing. So
thanks, IB, for making this decision.
I know.
Sure.
Well, the only concern is how they end up grading you, but hopefully maybe it doesn't matter too much. But it would be, you'd have a much more accurate grade if you could have written your second set of exams.
Yeah, this is true. This is the downside of it.
Yeah, that's the downside of it. I think your scores are going to be lower because you didn't write the exams. Because I think the orals are hard, and the written tasks are a bit hard as well. Or you weren't quite as well prepared for the written tasks. The orals, I know Dasha did really well. I don't know how you did either, but but the problem with the orals is that they only took like 6 to grade, and then they're going to change everyone's grade on the basis of those 6. So,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know. But don't worry about it. Don't worry about your grades, but just realize that they may not be reflective of your true abilities. I mean, like I said, Dasha, you should obviously have a 7, but I don't know that you're going to get a 7. Just because of the truncated evidence that they're going to be using.
Yeah.
So, but like I said, it doesn't matter, you know. And the colleges are all in a twit now because everything is such a mess. All the entrances are such a mess. Anyway, so you know, at this point, it doesn't matter. It just carry on, and I'm sure you'll both do just great. Your lives are really just starting now, and this is where it starts to matter. You know,
Yeah.
what to do from here. And I'm sure you'll both be awesome. Awesome. Yes, and Dasha, I'm sure, is going to be famous someday. She's going to be writing books and, you know, coming up with new psychoanalytic theories. Yeah, I knew her when she was just a little one. This was one of my students. This is me at 90, 95. Yeah. Isn't that right, sweetie? Yeah.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, no, you're gonna be awesome, sweetie. Yeah, find positive. Yeah, and make contributions to the world, I'm sure. Eva, I don't know you quite so well, sweetie, so but I expect to say if you're a friend of Dasha's, the same is probably true for you too. Yeah.
Hopefully.
What's that? Hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah. I'm just trying to keep up with her.
Yeah, I
Maybe sometime I will.
I know, I heard you. I had to work hard to keep up with her myself. I don't think I even got close, you know? I was kind of eating her
Come on.
dust. She and Fila both, I might add. Yeah. A couple of sharp cookies in that group.
Well,
Yeah.
Miss Jane, I just want to thank you first of all, since this year has come to an end. I just want to thank you for being such an amazing teacher to us and for picking us up at this stage where we weren't sure where we're going and what we're doing. And this has been our pride and pleasure to be with you, to have you as our teacher. And certainly thank you so much for speaking with us today. I think we got some really great insights about teaching and about for sure some great insights.
Oh, thank you, sweetie. Although I might have to change my prediction for her. She may actually end up being, you know, a commentator of some sort on television, famous commentator and internet host. How polished and fine she does. Yeah.
We're trying our best.
Okay.
Yeah, I also wanted to thank you for, even though I wasn't your student, but you provided me with a lot of help throughout this year, and I've got the knowledge that I wouldn't get otherwise. So thank you very much, and thank you very much for this interview and for everything that you have said and shared with us. It was great.
You're very welcome, sweetie. It's been a pleasure to know both of you, and hopefully I will see you both at graduation here pretty soon, huh?
Yes, we will see each other, and it's not a goodbye, it's a see you.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.